Hello and welcome to this educational webcast where we're going to discuss how shippers can better make the case and create the ROI for implementing a transportation management system for parcel. My name is Michael Levins and I'm Group Editorial Director for Peerless Media's Supply Chain Group, which of course includes Logistics Management Magazine, and I'll be your moderator for this session that's being brought to you by Logistics. Now, as we continue to cover in the pages of Logistics Management, today's Won It Now delivery expectations are pushing all shippers to rethink the way they orchestrate their parcel shipping operations. Of course, you've heard it over and over, transportation industry, the labor shortages, e-commerce order volumes, and of course the growing consumer expectations worldwide for same-day delivery are forcing companies in nearly every sector to grapple with increased parcel shipping costs. And as the parcel shipping industry continues to morph to accommodate these and other changes, the complexities that shippers have to contend with are now astronomical. Now, enter TMS for parcel shipping. And now, many in the audience today probably are aware this is a solution that enables informed parcel shipping decision-making in pretty much a fraction of the time otherwise required. But it also helps companies fully leverage shipping variables such as labor shortages and carrier rate increases and much more, which we're going to cover today. And that's all without having to renegotiate carrier rates and increase staff workload and any number of other issues and benefits there. But and while it sounds like an ideal solution, and it is in many situations, logistics professionals now need to fully understand the ROI before taking the leap forward. Now, as today's speaker, Ken Fleming, profoundly states as he kicks off today, and Ken, I don't want to steal your thunder, but I love this line, the benefits gained must outweigh the cost of the solution. And that is a really profound way of putting it, and it's exactly a true statement. And indeed, we're honored to be joined by Ken Fleming, and Ken is president of Logistics. Now, he's about to walk us through the 4 segments of requirements that can be met through a TMS for parcel solutions. He's going to also walk us through the various benefits a TMS for parcel can offer your operations, and he's going to help shippers take that first step towards implementing a solution. Now, just a quick note before Ken gets us started. We're going to have time for a Q&A session as we go through our presentation, so please make sure to submit those questions. Now, we're going to get to as many questions as we possibly can today while we're on the line with Ken, but if we don't get to your question in the time allotted, all the questions are going to be packaged up and sent off to Ken, and he'll be able to answer that via email to you directly. So also, too, guys, there's going to be a lot of resources to download, white papers, etc., and also a PDF of the presentation, which is really terrific. If you can download that and take a look at it, too, after the session, you can get right back to Ken with any other questions you might have as well. And that's about the housekeeping. So, Ken, without any further ado, why don't you lead us off today?
Michael, thank you so much. It's great to be back again. You didn't steal my thunder either. It's great that we reemphasize this, and it almost states the obvious. But for our listeners today, what I hope to be able to go through is not just make the obvious statement, but help them identify where to find those benefits. And when I talk about specifically the total cost of the solution, I really do mean not just the price of technology to help them solve the business problems that they're running into, but the cost of that, the services, the support, the engineering, the team behind it is the total cost of the solution, and that whole total cost must be outweighed by these benefits that we're going to be discussing today. So let me move forward, as you said, is that to set the stage for our listeners and talk about what we define as really the 4 segments with respect to TMS for parcel. And they're structured in a way that many companies don't recognize. In previous sessions that we've done online, we've talked about the fact that generating the label with respect to doing shipping fulfillment tends to be an afterthought for most organizations. And one of the things that we're doing is to help educate organizations of where to take advantage of TMS for parcel much earlier in the process. So whether it's doing rate shopping up front as a part of an e-commerce transaction, doing the label, but also being able to analyze and create intelligent business decisions based on the results of your shipping performance in the back end. And most companies think of it as an afterthought because they don't go through what I'll refer to here as this solution segmentation exercise. So let me start off by saying that many of the people that are listening to us today will be looking at this and wondering where they are. And that's what I will encourage them to do, is to try to listen to these 4 segments and determine where they fit within these segments today. And then later on, we'll talk about where do they want to go and what their business strategy is prior to getting into identifying the benefits and calculating the return. So let me start with what I'll define as the lower left-hand quadrant, or segment number 1. And that's what I refer to as an organization that's looking for the basic or base capabilities of doing fulfillment through a shipping system that would provide rate information, create labels that are compliant with the carriers that they use. Typically, these solutions are focused on the domestic market. Domestic being defined here as, U.S. for U.S., European countries for European countries, Canada for Canada, but you're moving within your specific domestic market. Because my assumption here is that we've got listeners today from all over the world who will view domestic by their own definition. But you're fulfilling within your own domestic market. And typically, that would deal with 2 to 3 carrier connections at most. And in particular, if we're looking at the U.S., it would be what we call the big 3, UPS, FedEx, and USPS. If we go beyond that, the next segment that we define is one that grows through execution. And if we refer to that left axis here is the amount of shipping or the volume of shipping and the geographical distribution that you're trying to achieve. So again, we're focusing on that base capability, but now that base capability is expanding in one of 2 ways. Either we're adding countries in different regions around the world, or we're expanding our local market execution by adding more carriers within a specific region. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. The third is where we begin to move along the lower axis, which is based on, let's say, capability or functionality, where organizations are expanding beyond the label. They want more. They're trying to make better business decisions. As a result of that, they're laying on top of that core basic functionality, visibility for track trace, proactive measurement of transactions in the process of fulfillment, performing procurement functions, doing rate simulations, finance such as integrated financial reconciliation, business intelligence, which we're going to hit on today because it's important to use that intelligence to help calculate ROI and, more importantly, to validate that you're receiving an ongoing ROI on a continual basis on a year-to-year, from a year-to-year format. And then auditing to ensure that you're actually paying what you ordered and no more, right? And if you can get it for less, why not, right? And then the last piece is where those 2 outer segments come together, and these are organizations that are looking for a true global strategy. So they're dealing with both domestic and international carrier networks. They need local market execution, and then those extended functions such as visibility, procurement, finance, et cetera, and intelligence come into play, but on a much broader, more global basis as a result. Companies that you would see, for example, that are in that upper right-hand quadrant would be focused on activities around omni-channel distribution, for example, rather than just a small e-com fulfillment footprint, which would be more in the lower left. So if we recognize those 4 quadrants, I'm going to dive a little bit into each one today, more so than we've done on previous presentations that we've done, to give an insight of how we describe those segments, what typically they are looking for in those segments, and which will lead us into the journey that these companies that are listening today should take when trying to calculate the ROI. So let's take a look at segment number 1. Now, in segment number 1, I defined this as a basic parcel shipping solution. And pretty well, a lot of the vendors that are out there that do this have these core capabilities. I mean, if you can't do these capabilities, you're below basics. So this is what I would define as core capabilities. There's a great presentation that and report that the Gartner Group has done that defines 9 core functions And it's something that for organizations that are out there interested in getting it, one of the things we can do is show the slides. We've done it in a previous presentation that will indicate what these core capabilities are. But within it, there are typically three types of strategies a company can take to fulfill what they're trying to do in that basic solution. So first is a single carrier strategy. Now, it might sound odd that, I'm talking about multi-carrier shipping or TMS for parcel, but how could you do multi-carrier shipping with a single carrier strategy? But bear with me, you'll catch on in a minute. But basically an organization that's chosen a carrier for a more personalized approach to what I would define as customer service from that carrier or delivery requirements. It's likely to cost them a little more, but for that little more, they're getting extra attention. So for example, that carrier will prioritize their shipments or put extra effort and extra workload into fulfilling because they know they're providing that premium service in a single carrier strategy. So for that little extra cost, you get that little extra bit of attention. But even within that strategy, there are different carrier services that can be evaluated. And we're going to come back to that as a moment as a key of how TMS for parcel or multi-carrier shipping solutions can assist companies even when they're in that single carrier strategy. Then I have what I refer to as the single carrier plus one. Now, many companies that I've spoken with view this as who's the backup. So in the event that that single carrier strategy hits a bump in the road, so to speak, that what is my backup alternative? But that's actually not what I'm referring to here. What we're seeing is most carriers plus one is adding the postal service for local market delivery. And they're finding that they're getting cost efficiencies for smaller items utilizing the post office for, say, items that are under a pound or half a kilo for our international audience. So you can utilize a service like that where it's going to be much quicker for the local market at a much better cost, but you're going to continue with your single carrier strategy for all else. And then you have the third strategy, which is that multi-carrier domestic strategy. Now here, what companies are doing is they may have different carriers by different transportation lines. They may have different carriers based on price options. And they tend to do, rate shopping to select the appropriate carrier based on what I call the 5 core things that need to determine which service to use. And they're simple, not that complicated. Origin, destination, the lead time for delivery, service type, and then cost. So if you know, for example, that you're doing a shipment from, say, Chicago to Dallas or from Amsterdam to Frankfurt, and you know your lead time here is 5 days, it would not make sense to select a 2-day service when you know a road service is going to offer it and get it there within that lead time. So it's about able to make those quick decisions on what the best service is, the service type associated with origin destination lead time at the best cost and still being able to meet your customer commitments, and then multiply that by the number of parcels that you're doing, and you have to be able to move very, very quickly. We see that our customers are looking now for response times on those decisions within 1/100th of a second. So those are the 3 types of strategies that companies could be taking that would fit into what we're referring to segment number 1. And we'll come back to things that they can look to in a moment with respect to how to generate that ROI within that segment. The next segment, or what I'm now calling segment number 2, is when we expand geographically or we increase our domestic carrier network. So everything that we discussed in segment 1 is still there. So the definition of scope here includes all the stuff I just reviewed, and it may add 1 or 2 of the next points or even a combination of both. So increasing geographic markets means we're now starting to add carriers outside of the domestic market. Now previously I said, well, what happens if we use the big 3? Well, aren't some of those big 3 providing services outside of a domestic market? And the answer is yes. But as we've mentioned in previous sessions, that do not underestimate how those organizations work, because even they differ in their processes, compliance, and the way that they perform business on behalf of you, the shipper, in multiple locations around the world. So there is no carrier that does things in a uniform way worldwide with one common set of standards. It just does not exist. So when you expand internationally, you need to ensure that you're being compliant and you're adding those carriers as you grow. And then you need to do so in a way that supports what I call localized compliance by market. Things are just different than from our home market. If you are European-based and you're shipping in the North American market, it differs. If you're North American-based and you're shipping products and goods into the APAC market or across Europe, things are different. And so you need to know that from a technology perspective, do the technology support those localized strategies, and then how do you take advantage of that? So companies are looking at that and how to address it that will impact the description of scope, which therefore weighs on the ROI that they're trying to calculate. And then the last point that I would make here is you can also increase domestically. And the two areas that we have seen companies increase are in adding FTL, LTL carriers as an extension of parcel, where it's defined as what I refer to as white glove service or bigger than parcel. And this is, an example that I've used is something that I've done where even in my own personal life, where I've ordered bicycles for my kids who are growing like weeds right now. And as they grow, it's time to get them up from the junior bike to what I'll call the teen bike. And in doing so, I ordered them. Now, by dimension and weight, they don't classify as parcel. And I ordered them online, and they were delivered as if it was a parcel, but it's coming from an FTL, LTL type carrier who provides that white glove service, meaning they brought them to my house, they opened up the boxes, they built the bicycles, they put them in my garage, they took all the packaging away and made me look like a hero, because when my kids got home, I said, hey, look what Dad just finished doing. But they provide that extra service, and it's treated like an e-commerce transaction and therefore fits into the picture, and companies need to add those carriers within their network for parcels that address that space. Or the second option might be adding same-day delivery or enabling what I refer to as a courier network, where you're looking at 1 hour, 2 hour type delivery of goods within a particular market. Typically in the large metropolitan markets, where retailers are trying to be able to get their goods on an on-demand basis to their consumers in those regions. And so when you start doing that, it adds complexity to how TMSs are addressing solutions to market, and therefore you're looking to create a greater ROI to justify an organization that's moving into this segment. Segment number 3 is that what I call expansion of capabilities. So again, this one includes those requirements that we defined in segment number 1, but it will add functional capabilities. And my apologies, I realize here that we've got a mix-up on the slide, but let me talk to it instead. That this is more about creating views of visibility, creating functions around supporting the procurement process of a transaction, such as tendering, closed user group bids, rate simulations, finance for integrated financial reconciliation, or automated payment of carrier transactions, and extending business intelligence and audit services as a part of the solution. And on segment number 4, it combines all of those together, bringing really the segments of 2 and 3 into the solution. It's not necessarily all global requirements, but it's more often that you've got different regional requirements, or what I define as multiple regional requirements that you're trying to manage all under one solution strategy. A global multi-carrier solution requires it to be standardized, but it needs to adapt to local processes and local carriers to be effective. So with each of these segments, you can imagine already now, if you're viewing where you are and you're thinking we're going to calculate an ROI, depending on your starting segment, it's going to be very different for you. So let's take a look at the things that we need to think about before we start this process of calculating the ROI. So first, I'm going to ask you to think where you are today. And if we use this slide that we've spoken about with the 4 segments, I'm just going to plot a few things. So if I happen to be in that lower quadrant that we were discussing where I'm starting with a base solution, I then, because by the descriptions that I've used, that's where I am, I then think of where do I plan to be, or where am I aiming to be? What is my organization asking me to do? So am I moving from a domestic-based type solution where my organization is expanding towards an omni-channel strategy? Then those are the 2 dots that represent where I want to be in this organization. So that second dot of where I'm aiming to be means I'm expanding more into global markets. I need more functionality, but I'm not going completely global where I have to ship maybe into Asia Pacific and Europe and all across North and South America. So I think this tends to represent most of the enterprise type companies that we speak with. And then we have to evaluate, well, not only am I needing to turn around what's my ROI for what I'm accomplishing today, but how I'm going to generate the ROI to show how I'm going to grow what I'm doing to where I want to be. So it's 3 components that I would ask each of our listeners today to think about where they would plot themselves on this quadrant before we start talking about, all right, where do we begin? So let's take a look at, after plotting, now how do I want you to think about it? And this is something that actually we at Logistics use, not so much about calculating ROI, but actually how we define our business models and how we grow from what types of services we provide today versus what we want to be as a company going forward. So let me start on the right-hand side by talking about my target. And my target in this case says, what does the to-be solution look like for you? Are you looking at a geographic expansion? Are you looking towards a global e-commerce footprint? Are you implementing an omni-channel strategy? Are you adding same-day delivery service? What are the things that you are being asked to think about as your organization grows? And on the left-hand side, what are you actually doing today? So describe your segment. Which one of those segments are you in? What's working within that segment for you today? And more importantly, what's not? What do you believe you could focus on that would generate improvements? And the way that I utilize this chart within my own organization is a way of getting the various teams that I'm responsible for to think about what are the key functions and projects that they're going to focus on that allows them to migrate from the left to the right. So thereby creating, as the arrow points out here, the plans to get from where we are to where we truly want to be. And in this particular case, each of these steps or stages help them achieve that target. So each one of these things are key focal points identified by my organization or by your organizations that say, where do I look to get those benefits? And that's the process by which I'm going to try to help the organizations that we're speaking with today identify how to move forward. So let's take a look at that now. How do you find the benefits? Well, I'm going to specifically talk about a couple of examples. Now, here's the thing that I would tell everybody is that I did, in that chart that I was talking about with steps a moment ago, I just put 5 blanks in there. There are way more options of how to help companies justify this. I've got a few that I'm going to mention, and I've got 2 I'm going to give a little more detail into. But there are way more that I'm pointing out to organizations today. And when we get through some of these examples, one of the things I'm going to suggest is how else you can look and where you can go to look for these benefits with other sources in mind. So I'm going to talk briefly about 2 of these 4 just as key examples. So when we talk about, for example, when we're talking about a specific comptroller audit report, right? This is specific where we're looking for how do I demonstrate potential savings if I'm looking to a multi-carrier solution that I'm going to provide in either rate or carrier selection versus the way that I'm doing it today, right? What's the benefits? What can I do to analyze my data that's going to give me that benefit? We're going to focus on one. That's one that I've picked for today. Another one that is so surprising to me, and we run into it over and over again, and it seems so obvious. And a little tip is that a multi-carrier solution will help organizations with this, right? But it's something that you don't need a solution to fix if you have the ability to go in and fix it yourself. And that's address corrections. The number of times that we see organizations not fixing an invalid address when they perform a shipment. So you ship it, it gets delivered, but you get notified by the carrier that it was delivered based on a bad address and you pay a little fine. Well, why not fix that address so that next time you're not hit with the fine? And over again, organizations come across as just not prepared or unwilling, or maybe it's too difficult for them to actually go in and update master data to reflect the correct address. But that one is such an obvious one that we see every single time. And some of the companies we see it in would amaze you. And then shipment corrections report, really demonstrating where problems may occur with dimensions or other areas of the shipment with respect to dim weight structures. Are you doing the right kind of shipment up front? And we can identify that, right? And then another one that I've chosen to help people focus on today is what I call a freight spend analysis. But in particular here, we're going to focus on what I call behavior correction, because that's where the big win is for companies that I've seen in too many cases that is ignored. And so let's talk about those two for a moment. Okay, so first, let's talk about that controller audit type report of looking for how a multi-carrier solution might benefit. So in this report, I'm going to start with a screen that takes a look at what I would call our typical starting point. And this basically says, if I've got a single carrier strategy, and in that single carrier strategy, I use one particular carrier. This takes my real data, and utilizing that real data, it shows me what my total costs are, my total shipment volume, my total weight volume, all the things I'm doing in front of me right now. And as a part of that, it's showing in this screen a total savings of 0 because today's today, and if I haven't done anything to change that, I'm not going to generate any savings. So what would happen if I was therefore to switch to a different carrier? So I negotiate a rate, I get what I think is the best deal possible from that secondary carrier, and now I want to compare kind of a before and after from what I did with carrier A to now what I'm going to do with carrier B. And in this case, what the report is showing us is what the potential savings are by switching from one carrier to the other. And this is a complete switch. Okay, so what you'll see, easiest thing to do is to focus on the map for a moment, is the green highlighted area are areas where we've seen gains, and the red highlighted areas are areas where we've actually seen an increase to our cost. And what you're seeing on the top lines here is the results are showing the total overall savings as a result of switching based on the rates that we've been able to negotiate, or you've been able to negotiate. So at a glance, very, very quickly, you see the benefit of one versus the other. Well, now what happens if we compare that to another potential carrier? And in this particular case, again, the green representation would say if we went to that carrier instead, this green area shows where we would see gains versus the reds where we've seen a change or a negative increase to our cost. And therefore, we're seeing a less savings overall in this one. So those seem pretty obvious. Well, what's the process in this? Well, if I go negotiate rates with carriers and I get better rates, I can analyze that information and determine if I'm going to want to switch from one versus the other. But the real potential of a multi-carrier solution comes in is when you select and choose the right one based on an optimized transportation strategy. So what happens if you optimize the information? Which means consolidate all your rates, all your volume, and everything you're doing, and analyze it across all the potential contracts you could be utilizing. And now let's take a look at the benefits. And what you're seeing again in the green is where you've actually seen an increased benefit or reduced cost. And then the red, now you're seeing an area where your overall cost did go up. But you'll notice that the results on that top bar are indicating that we've maximized the total potential savings by moving to a multi-carrier solution. And in this particular case, 24% savings over what we were doing. And this is not based on, fake data, whatever the case may be. It would be done on your data. You plug your data in here, you do this analysis, and you need to utilize solutions that will quickly calculate this to say, what are the key benefits of adding, subtracting, multiplying the number of carriers I use, and how it's impacting performance within my transportation network. This is one of the easiest ways to find the benefits of looking towards a multi-carrier solution. And it's often overlooked because it's not easy to get the data first and then put it into a solution or analyze, compare contracts against what your actual volume is on a historical basis. So that's the first thing that I recommend that companies that are looking for, if you like, the quick analysis, quick wins, they can do that. Now, if you remember when I was talking about those organizations that have a single carrier strategy, and if I went back to that particular slide for a moment, there's a single carrier strategy. So Ken, if I have a single carrier strategy, why would I go through this? And you could have the same benefits and same calculations generated by evaluating different carrier services provided by those carriers. So for example, if I'm determining that I want to increase my customer performance, and what if I want to move all shipments that I do into a guaranteed minimum 2-day delivery service? Well, I can take all my shipping volume historically, analyze that against this new service offering that I want to do, and find out if I'm going to create a savings against it or if I'm going to be impacted by additional cost. So this can be done across carriers or carrier services to be able to identify potential savings and maybe even increase cost, but you know that you're generating increased value to your customers as a result. So the exact same process can be used also within a single carrier strategy. So that's an example of what we would do in looking at what you're doing today and then applying a multi-carrier solution that actually has those core capabilities of rate shopping and processing and parcel optimization included. The second one that I suggested that we could focus on today was on freight spend management. Now, this is one that over the years, as I've gotten a chance to work with many of our customers and we work with them on their data, was the big aha gotcha moment to me, because it was one of those things that was overlooked and identified by a couple of key clients, and we went, how many organizations do we see making this? And I want to show you what the problem is and then give you a snapshot of some real data that shows how to, as I said, correct the behavior. So here's a couple of things. If we look at freight spend management, and I look at it from the perspective of what are we trying to accomplish? So if I said, let's take a look at accessorial costs. And within accessorial costs, there are 3 key ways that I've seen companies try to manage this. One is they negotiate a fixed rate with carriers. What does that mean? It basically means that they're getting a rate that doesn't take any accessorials into consideration, or let's call it an all-inclusive type rate, or a one price does all. It usually is higher than a contracted rate, right? And in my view, it overcompensates for potential errors that can occur, which would drive accessorial fees, right? My conclusion in this process is that it's a method of ignoring the actual problem. And I'll get to that in a moment as we define some of the data. The second approach that I've seen companies do is to outsource the management of this process. So there's a lot of information, there's a lot of detail, there's a lot of calculations in dealing with all these extra costs that occur within the process. I'm going to have somebody else do it for me. Well, my conclusion to that one is it's an approach. That third party will do it for you, but they do it for a fee, and it's usually designed on a gain share model. So does that outsourced third party, are they incented to actually eliminate and fix the problem or just manage it? And that's my conclusion on this one, that they're designed by nature to manage the problem versus fixing it. Now, the third objective here then is if you have the ability to analyze the data and see the results, can the solution allow you to therefore manage and correct the behavior that fixes the problem? So here's the only thing with this situation is I haven't really explained the problem yet. So let's take a look. Here's what I define the benefit of the perfect world. And I'm just talking about accessorial fees for a moment. But if the left axis here talks about volume of shipments and the right axis reflects time, what we're basically doing is saying, look at that top blue line. Of the volume of shipments I do, the red line in this case reflects the number of errors that I've received on all my shipments that drives up my additional fees and costs. And if I'm able to monitor those, my objective, here by the green line, is to A, understand what creates them, but change behavior, whether the behavior is created by my organization, your organization in this case, or by the carriers, and correct it to lower the number of errors substantially, therefore creating a better return long term. Right? Now, what are we looking at when we're seeing this is the following key things. First of all, what does it take to fix this problem? Well, you need visibility to some data, right? You need visibility to the shipment orders, where they come from, the system of record, whether it's an ERP, WMS system, or an order management system, that you have to be able to match up the costs with what's being shipped to look for this potential savings opportunity. You need to have the carrier communication data, the sending orders, the receiving deviations, the delivery notifications to reconcile against those shipments. You need the invoice information in an e-invoice format that typically might come in an EDI form, for example, such as for North America an 810 or a 210, or in Europe as an invoice. And you're marrying that information together to create the analysis that we're talking about here. Now, the incentive to a carrier could be that they get paid quicker based on an auto reconciliation. If the invoice matches the planned transaction, why not just say it's done? It doesn't have to go through an approval process because it's pre-approved. And it actually is better for them because the threat is if they don't fix their problems, you're going to look to alternative providers that are going to give you a better price with fewer errors as a part of the strategy. So what would this data look like? Now, what I'm going to show you in this slide is real data. And in this particular case, you're looking at a customer that over a period of 3 years analyzed just their accessorial fees. So the blue line here represents the actual costs overall. The green was what was being approved by the shipper, and the red were the non-approved costs. Now, there are a couple key things in this graph that stand out to me. The first one's the obvious one. The starting point when they did not analyze the data was they were pretty well approving every invoice they got with every additional cost that they got, and you can see that by at the beginning of the graph, the blue and the green lines pretty well match. And then by the end, you will notice that they absolutely match, but they're significantly different. And if I just did rough math and I say that the end goal says that they're balanced out at about $50,000 per month compared to where their starting point was around $200,000, that's on an average. If they had not addressed the problem, we could assume that those blue-green lines would have continued over that 36-month period. And therefore, what's the quick math? $150,000 over savings over 3 years, 150,000 per month over 3 years, and you get an idea of the amount of savings that can be generated by identifying these problems and having a technology that actually helps them correct them rather than just manage them. So that was observation number one. Observation number two is a little less transparent in the data, but it is basically reflected on the red line. That the minute that this particular customer analyzed the data, you see where that green line drops around month number 11. Actually starts in 10 and drops down to 12. And that's where this shipper now saw what was going on and decided to stop doing it. They were no longer auto-approving additional fees. And what ended up happening on the other end, therefore, is the carrier's behavior also changed. Because they were being unimproved, they increased the number of invoices that were coming in as a result, and therefore made it more difficult to be managed. And so what you see happening over the next 12 months is what I call that behavioral correction. That by having access to the data, by able to share the data with the carriers, the negotiations took place to change the behavior of making sure that the invoices matched up exactly, making sure that things like address corrections were being made ahead of plan rather than just auto-approving address corrections by the carriers. That behavior drastically changed to the end and obviously created significant savings for this particular customer in this case. So those are the types of things that I find that most companies seem to never really have the time to say, take a break, take a look at the data, what does the data tell me, and therefore, what am I going to do about it that can instantly create an ROI for any company trying to implement a strategy or a technology that would help identify these savings and be a benefit to the organization. So, where does that leave us? A couple of final comments to make for everyone. Where do you start? Well, the first part is, I would say, clean up your data, right? And I see it there on the screen. I'm looking at two different slides here, but that's what this slide says. I'm not sure why it's coming across, but that's what it says. Clean up your data. You've got to get access to your data, extract it, cleanse it so we're not dealing with duplication, wipe out duplicates, make sure you're not processing multiple invoices, paying for things twice, verify the data, validate it, and then segment that data so that you're analyzing parcel for parcel, LTL for LTL, FTL for FTL. There's a process involved in doing this, but make sure your data is clean so that you're working with real information. I am astonished by the number of companies we meet that have difficulty, finding the data, and then when they do, they don't realize the quality of that information to actually really create true calculations. Many times when we see this, the first time we go through companies to help them analyze the information, we find what I refer to as the false positive, that the data looks overly promising, but it's because there's a lot of duplicates and information has been segmented properly in order to create the actual potential ROI. The next is on analyzing the data. And here it now says, well, how do I look at it? And there are two things. First of all, is looking at it, there are different tools that are out there, and I'm going to talk about, the third step in a moment. But first is I see too many companies that are embarrassed by the data. So if you found out that you're one of those organizations that doesn't do address validation or has not been correcting addresses and repeatedly being fined for sending things to a bad address, then why haven't you done it in the past? Well, why would I want to point that out? And I would turn around and say it's better late than never to do the calculation, identify the problem, and ensure that you're the one who's going to fix it for your organization going forward. So don't be embarrassed about what it shows. Actually, take advantage of it. And through the analysis, it'll point to key areas that you should be able to go in and say to your organization, with these things, I will be able to improve the performance of our organization overall and generate that ROI that we're looking for to implement the solution that's going to help me grow from where I am today to where I am being asked to take the organization to in the future. And the last piece of advice is to utilize the experts. And what do I mean by experts? Well, I think there really are three here. There are industry experts you can call upon, advisory groups such as whether you might be working with Gartner or ARC Advisory or other consulting firms that are out there that know where to look or what to do. There are always consultants in our industry around transportation and logistics that specialize in helping organizations find the data, normalize it, cleanse it, and get to the results that we're talking about here. And the third is the vendors, right? I think that too many times companies forget that the vendors have exposure to a lot of companies, the companies that they serve as customers, and therefore how they've helped other customers like you achieve those benefits as well. Because ultimately, if a vendor can show you the ROI, it helps them in the end, ultimately. So those are my three parting tips. Michael, I will pause at this point and hand it back over to you.
Outstanding, Kenny, and a great job. And I'm going to let everybody in attendance know we have a number of questions rolling in. We do have about 4 or 5 minutes, Ken, to tackle a couple of these questions before we do need to wrap up. I just want to remind everybody, if we don't get to your question today, it'll be moved over to Ken. He'll be able to get to you via email. So, Ken, a couple of questions are rolling in, and I think you actually touched on answers in this last section here in terms of, how do I know where to look to start? And here's one question I thought was interesting. What are the signals that really show or signal that I need help in this area? What are some of those early warning signs?
Well, what is it that we say that, when you just do things for doing its sake, you repeat things over and over again as if things are not going to get better. And I won't say what that definition is, but, you look at people are not taking the time, right? You've got to carve out the time to be able to analyze what we're doing. It is so important. And I think that too many companies are focused on this. I got to get the label on the box. I got to do fulfillment. That's what I'm being asked to do. I don't have time to take a look at this. And therefore, they're rushing to implement a solution that's really not the right solution for them based on the segments that we were discussing earlier.
Right.
And then you take a look at those segments and they say, yeah, but those systems are different. How do I justify it? And that's really the approach that we're suggesting here is know where you are. I try to identify with your organization's help where they're asking you to go, and then based on that, start to build the journey that we've been focusing on. So that's what I would say is with where to look is start there first.
Yep. Absolutely. I'm just going to put that back up, that quick, the parcel, the segments when you lay that all out. How do you know where to look? How do you know that the benefits of each of these segments?
Well, that's some of the kind of things that I've tried to highlight, right, is that the organizations, if you haven't been through that, if you actually said, I'm a domestic solution, I've got a one carrier strategy, everything's fine. Well, how do you know it's fine? Yeah, your quality of service is good. Your carrier partner's not letting you down. But what are you comparing it to? And that's really what we're suggesting here is give it a scorecard. Compare it. Take a look. You may choose not to switch. It might be the right thing for you, but analyze that. Now, in each of those boxes, what I've done today is given individual tips of the key areas to look for in each one. But then, like I said, I picked 2 examples of 4 scenarios that there are just too many to name. So really, there's nothing better than going to the experts and say, look, talk to the industry organization, talk to the consultants, talk to some of the vendors that are out there that make a living of doing these things, and they'll point you into the right direction. And and the one thing I firmly believe on that last one, vendors, advice is free.
Yep. Right. Exactly. And I thought this slide in particular that I just popped back up into the screen was pretty telling and extremely helpful. I thought it was a terrific slide. Now, Ken, I have a question here from the floor. I currently use an audit company now. Doesn't that accomplish a lot of the same objectives that you spelled out for us today?
Yes. So I would define those companies as one of the experts, but I would also make sure and recommend that you challenge them. What are they doing to improve your performance? Now, if you remember, I said there's 3 methods. Look at that accessorial model that we talked about earlier, and I said there's 3 key points to look at, right? One is you might negotiate a contract that says, I don't have to worry about accessorials because it's buried in the fee. It's all inclusive.
Right.
Well, again, that doesn't fix the problem, and it doesn't identify an opportunity. If you've outsourced to an audit company that's managing it for you, that does drive a benefit because it's helping you find the savings, but did it fix the symptom,
Right.
the cause, sorry.
Yep.
Did they help you identify the symptom and cause, and therefore what is the corrective action? So while they are a very good option, I'm suggesting to our listeners to push them and say, what are you doing to help me improve that area and actually get more savings from that space? And the good ones that are out there are the ones that are able to respond and help companies improve that. So absolutely a great source of help for what we're discussing today.
Absolutely, and that was a great way to wrap it up in those last couple slides, Ken, and a great way to wrap up today's session as we're kind of up against the clock right now. And again, we do have a number of questions that have rolled in. We're going to move all those over to Ken, and Ken will get back to you via email. Well, Ken Fleming, President of Logistics, my friend, another terrific job and a terrific series of webcasts you produced. Well done, and I'm going to thank you and the folks at Logistics, and also thank everybody for attending today. Have a terrific day.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you, Ken.